Good morning. In 2022, the Commerce Department of the United States announced much more strict export controls than existed previously. These export restrictions were intended to deny China the most advanced semiconductors. These new restrictions were announced in October of 2022. Now we have all the actual market data, both from China and from our own companies. And it's clear now that these export curbs and restrictions have failed in every respect. And they're not merely failing, but they're demolishing our own semiconductor industry while supercharging China's semiconductor industries. These data come from reports by the New York Federal Reserve Bank and the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Remember first that China needs a lot of semiconductor, computer chips, because they make all the things that the chips are necessary for. Electric cars, appliances, computers, smartphones. So China is the world's biggest market for chips for all that stuff, and nobody else even comes close. Next, remember that China has a lot of people, millions of them, who are already working in their domestic semiconductor industry. Their semiconductor industry is much bigger than any other country's, so everything they need to further develop their own industries was already here. This is a 60-page report from the New York Federal Reserve in April 2024, so it includes data through March of 2024. So about 18 months since the strict export controls were put on. To put this report together, they pulled tax filings, bank records, credit reports, employment records, hiring and layoffs, and payroll data. The sectors they examined was the technologies for semiconductors, telecommunications, and artificial intelligence. They wanted to find answers to these questions here. Did the export controls work by decoupling Chinese companies? What happened in the markets after the export controls were put on? And what were their financial effects to our own companies? They found bad news right away. The export controls did result in U.S. companies cutting off business with Chinese companies who were on the restricted lists. However, it also resulted in cutting off business with Chinese companies not on the restricted lists. U.S. companies just stopped doing business with other companies in China because of the risk of having other companies added later. U.S. suppliers form fewer relationships with other companies in country by 60 to 68%. This means that the Chinese business that was being lost, for example, by cutting off business with Huawei, was not being replaced by revenues from other Chinese companies. It gets worse. We cannot find new customers outside China either. There's no friendshoring, such as with buyers in Korea or Japan or Europe, and there's no reshoring back to the United States. Again, this is because the Chinese market is just too big. There isn't enough demand from the rest of the whole world to replace Chinese companies with buyers elsewhere. So naturally, this means our own companies are losing a lot of money. They are negatively affected by export controls. As of April, the New York Fed calculated losses of market capitalization of $130 billion. And as the market valuations get hit, so do revenues, profitability, bank credit lines and borrowing, and jobs. This table here shows how many U.S. companies are affected year by year in blue, and the cumulative line is in red. So as of the end of 2022, there are 124 or so U.S. companies that cannot sell products to China without special authorization by the Commerce Department. If the U.S. company is denied license to sell to China, the U.S. company needs to find another buyer somewhere else to make up for the losses of sales. And that's not happening. American companies are running scared. They don't know what to do. U.S. companies will get fined if they do business with companies who then sell technologies to Chinese companies on the restricted lists. So they don't do anything at all. They don't sell to other companies in China. What's more, there are two problems with friendshoring. The market just isn't big enough, and our firms have no assurance either that companies in Europe or elsewhere in Asia won't simply resell to Chinese companies who are on the restricted lists.